Welcome to the Marvelous Moms Club podcast. Discover yourself, break out of mediocrity, and become the mom you've always aspired to be. Here's your host, Kirsten Tyrell.
Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of Marvelous Moms Club. I'm so excited for my guest. Debbie Reber is going to be on here talking to us and sharing some amazing things. But what I want to say is that I'm always, for some reason, amazed by this when you're in totally different time zones. Like you're done with your Monday and I just started mine and that just blows me away. So welcome to the show. Tell everybody where you are and a little bit about your family life and what's going on for you right now.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. And yeah, I'm actually calling you from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where we have been for a little over 4.5 years. And we kind of moved here thinking, we'll just try it for a year or two. We'll travel and then we'll move back to the States. And here we still are because we just kind of fell in love with it and things are going well. So we thought, why change anything if we don't have to?
Right. Yeah. Why fix what isn't broken? Don't break it.
And just in my family situation, I'm a mom of one child. I have a 13-year-old son who is differently wired, which is one of the reasons why we kind of wanted to shake things up and make this move in the first place. And I know we'll get into that in our conversation.
Yeah, which I'm so excited to get into. Yours, I think, when you filled out like an intake form, it's maybe been a little while. And when I read yours, I remember being really, really overwhelmed with like, this is why I do Marvelous Moms Club. These are the people that I need to talk to personally who are out there to like benefit my life. And if it benefits thousands of others, then all the better. But I was really, really moved when I read that. So, I mean, we can just dive into that. Tell me a little bit about kind of your background with Asher and really what it kind of led to in your life and what you pursue now.
Yeah. So, as I said, we're raising this child who's differently wired, which is a term that I use to describe kind of anyone who's got narrow differences and, which can be anything from ADHD to being gifted or anxiety or dyslexia, so many ways it can show up. But, I think for parents like me and what I certainly experienced is just, having this one set of expectations about what the whole journey was going to look like, what school was going to look like, and our life in Seattle, and kind of living in this neighborhood and community where, things kind of look a certain way. And ours kind of started to veer off that path around preschool. We realized this is not actually moving the way we thought it was going to. And so we, the preschool years and those early years of elementary were difficult because as we got more information about who our son was and how differently he was moving through the world, we also kind of kept butting up against systems that really weren't designed to support or accommodate who he is. The educational system was kind of a disaster, frankly, and went to 3 different elementary schools in 3 years.
Wow.
Trying to figure out like what are we going to do here? How are we going to find the fit?
Right.
And, in many ways, moving here was right at the end of 2nd grade. This opportunity came up for my husband's work. And, we were kind of like, this isn't working. Like what we're doing now is not working. We just have to try something completely different. So we took kind of a leap of faith and what ended up, and we decided I would homeschool. So there was a lot of things that changed through this move, and it was terrifying. And the first year was really difficult, and still have our difficult days. Not to say that we're past that, but in kind of adapting our expectations, and then me really having to change my life, my work, everything to really lean into who Asher is and homeschool him.
Yeah.
It's paid off so well. Like I can't imagine doing anything different. And we've had this whole turnaround where I just, honestly, I feel so grateful, even on the really tough days, grateful that I'm getting to do this with him.
That's amazing. Okay. So I have this is like a really personal question, but I'm really curious myself. So you have just Asher. Did you only plan on one child, or was like kind of his level of, because you realized at like preschool that he was going to be a little bit more of a challenge. Does that kind of what led you guys to only having one, or were there other reasons for that? I mostly asked because I have three, and I feel like if I just had the one, if I had known how difficult he was going to be, it would have been really hard for me to want to keep going, because I can see like how much energy and time. I have a son who's they're probably not identical in their struggles, but the amount of attention that I really do need to put into my oldest one, like I can see how I'd have so much more capacity to do that had I not had the other children. And that doesn't mean I wish I wouldn't have had the other children. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. No, and it's a great question. And also I have no boundaries, so I have no problem answering it.
Awesome.
I would say, I think I assumed, both my husband and I assumed we would be having two kids. I mean, we both came from two, families with two kids in each family. And that's just kind of what you do.
Yeah.
And, Asher was, as a little guy, really turned our world upside down even before preschool. He was kind of, as they call a highly spirited baby. And, there was colic and lots of other things that just seemed to be more intense than what our friends were experiencing with their little ones. And I do remember having a very specific conversation. I'm picturing it because I was in New York visiting or doing something for work, and my husband was in Seattle, and we're on the phone, and I just said, I don't know if I can do this again. I don't know if I can, have another child. And he said, well, we don't have to. And I was just remember feeling this wave of relief, like, okay. And, it's certainly something we've talked about over the years and, considered. And, of course, my son is so glad he has no siblings. That would be his worst nightmare. He loves being an only child. And I have to say, a lot of the parents that I connect with through the community that I work with of parents raising differently wired kids, a lot of them do have multiples. And I know it must be so challenging because I really am able to dedicate my time and energy on this one human, which is, it's such a gift, I know, and it's not something that every parent gets to do.
Yeah. So is that kind of, I know that you've created the Tilt program, which I want to get into, Tilt Parenting. But is that something that you really dive into there as like an awareness for people who do have multiple children, who do have, kids who are not wired in that same way, to really adjust like the parenting style to just one child? Is that something you dive into there?
Yeah. And it's actually, I'm just trying to find another expert to bring onto my podcast to talk about sibling issues specifically, because, whether it's having one neurotypical kid and one differently wired kid, or, in many cases, parents have kids that are differently wired, but in very different ways. And that can be so challenging too. So yeah, I mean, I'm always looking for resources to make sure that the conversations I'm bringing to parents can support them in that specific scenario.
That's awesome. So since I brought that up, tell everybody a little bit about Tilts and kind of the premise of it and what you've been working on there.
Well, I really wanted to, I knew long ago when Asher was probably in those like kindergarten, first grade years, that I was really dissatisfied with the kind of resources I had access to, not just in what was available, but even like down to the aesthetic experience. So much of what I was seeing online was really, it was kind of like a Debbie Downer, it just wasn't visually pleasing. It made me kind of feel bad all the time, like there's something wrong here, And so I always wanted to figure out a way to create an experience so that parents like me could feel optimistic and positive about their experience, and that it isn't like we got membership in the wrong club, but really we have this great club, and it's kind of a cool place to be. So that was the initial seeds of the idea. And then a couple of years ago, I just, as I really started to understand more of who Asher is and how I could best support him, and then seeing the way he transformed through this work that I was doing and the resources I was connecting with, I decided I wanted to share that information with parents. And so it's been almost 2 years ago that I launched Tilt Parenting, primarily as a podcast initially. And so I do weekly episodes where I selfishly bring on all the people that I wanted to talk to and all the people, these incredible experts, and get to have these conversations with them. And what I've heard and what's happened is, it's helped people feel like they're not alone in this experience, because more than anything, that's what I felt. I felt isolated, I felt stuck, and I felt like no one else really knew what I was going through. And so many parents with atypical kids are kind of living their challenges in secrecy.
Mm-hmm.
And because there is so much stigma associated with different neurodifferences. And so people are just really suffering. And
Yeah.
I really want to, through the podcast, and now, I have a book coming out called Differently Wired. And, really what I want to do, kind of my Uber goal through Tilt, is help parents feel in choice, help them feel confident and peaceful and great about who their kids are, to realize they're not broken. There's nothing wrong with being differently wired, that it's a difference. It's not a deficit. And I want to help parents find their voice in this experience, because I think until we really talk openly about who our kids are, and not just openly, but not from a place of shame or embarrassment, but, this is really cool. You know what my kid's doing right now? Like, this is a really incredible experience. And I think if we can all find our voice, it's going to shift this conversation in a way that our families and our kids will benefit from.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you're doing that. And that's, again, why, I've battled deciding whether to bring this podcast back to life, because it's something that kind of got stagnant for a while. And in reading about you and reading about your experience, I literally was brought to tears, because I was like, this hits home so much for me that there really is too much silence with it. There's too much embarrassment and shame, but I see it so much. Like, I don't think I know anybody who has, quote unquote, the ideal situation with their children, and as I've raised a child who's wired differently, it is isolating, because you try and have conversations and you try to relate to people. And if you have come across several moms who are like, oh yeah, I get what you mean, my kid does da da da, and you're like, no, like I'm talking on a different level here.
Yeah.
Like, that's really terrible that your kid got into your makeup one time, but my kid, like, he tried to make makeup, he tried to make chemicals together. Like, my child is next level, and it becomes this like, well, I don't want to constantly feel like I'm trying to one up everybody, that my kid is the least behaved, but you just want to be heard, and it's so isolating. I could really let myself get super, super vulnerable right now and talk about all the pain, but there's so much pain, and there's so much fear that you're raising this child that's going to turn out to be, for me, like, this is just my story. I'm afraid I'm raising a child who's going to turn out to be a sociopath, that I'm not giving him all the resources, that I don't know what I'm doing, that I'm not an equipped mom, that I'm not connected to the right people. And for a long time, I didn't have the money to put into, like, therapy and programs that could really help him. And I was just drowning, and I feel like a prisoner in my own life. And those are not good things to keep to yourself. Those are not positive emotions to keep trapped and to not talk to other people about. But I think there has to be this safety net and this zone where you can talk about it without feeling like you're shaming your child, or that you're just trying to talk about how horrible your situation is. It's just needing to be heard from people who will kind of understand and respect where you are, and lift you up to the next level and encourage you without, letting you wallow in it, but also listening. So I think this is such an important community to build. And that's why I'm so passionate. I'm so grateful that you're on here, and I'm grateful that you have a whole separate podcast for people, because I think this is a need, a really, really big need.
Well, I so appreciate you sharing all of that. And everything that you said, I'm like, yep. I mean, just that, and I hear this from so many parents, but I write about this too. I think we sometimes tend to almost throw our kids under the bus because we want people to really see,
yes,
no, you don't understand. And then there's the guilt for throwing our kid under the bus.
Yes.
And then, but it is very complicated. And I do think, there's a lot of things that have to happen here in order for things to change. I'm calling it a paradigm shift. I really want the experience for our kids to change. I want the experience for our families to change. And part of that is work we need to do on ourselves, right? To to get comfortable with what's hard and to, just keep showing up and doing this hard work and kind of doing the work on ourselves, like where are we getting triggered by, all these different situations. But then there is also an education piece with our friends who are raising neurotypical kids, and they're a part of this too.
Yeah.
They're a part of what's kind of keeping all of us stuck. And it's kind of tricky. So I think there is some compassionate education that needs to happen so that other people can be aware of what's going on. I call it that we're kind of the extreme sport parents, like the wingsuit flyers of parenting. That's kind of our experience because it is on a different level in many ways. Yeah,
it totally is. That's such a good comparison because it is true. Like, yeah, that's such a great way to put it. It's absolutely the best because it can be such an exhausting process. And as you were saying that, I'm sitting here thinking, how can we navigate this territory to where I feel like people in general, maybe just in my own community, what I see is people are getting so good at eliminating the mommy wars. I see really great communities. Like my group on Facebook is really fantastic. There's so much support. There's no judgment. There's really just people trying to lift each other and encourage each other. As we bring in, like, okay, so I'll be honest. Like when there's the food allergy situation, before I was educated on how serious this was, even from having guests on this podcast talk about what their life looks like with children with food allergies, I went from being the mom who's like, oh my gosh, I can't send peanut butter sandwiches with my kids. Why can't they just have the kids sit at a different table? That's such an honest moment for me. But now, because I'm educated and I understand, like I have so much compassion and I think, wow, I was so selfish. And so just navigating, how do we keep these conversations going and keep this awareness going without everybody feeling like, we can just get in this trap where we're like, I can't say or do anything, or there's somebody who will be offended. I don't want people to feel like they can't live and that there's insensitivity to maybe that their life doesn't work like this so that they don't have to fully understand it. But I don't know that I'm necessarily making a statement or asking a question. How can we kind of navigate this as moms who have such different situations as we raise children?
I mean, I think your example of the allergies is a great one in that, I think for parents raising neurodiverse kids, we also have our own hangups, right?
Yeah.
And we also have our own beliefs about, even within neurodiversity, that there's a hierarchy. Well, this is better than this. At least my kid doesn't have this. I mean, it's kind of constant. And so I think for all of us, it's a matter of starting to notice where are those blind spots for me? Where am I kind of doing some judging? Where am I, painting with a broad brush this group or that group? And I think that coupled with, again, this compassionate education. And there's an example, I'll just say that, I had a really good friend, a dear friend of mine who used to say, just downplay things all the time, like, oh, all boys are, rambunctious. All boys are, I would be trying to share something that I'd been through and it was just minimized constantly. And I finally had to say, I say this with love, and this is actually really hurtful for me when you say that because it makes me feel as if I'm not being heard and it makes me kind of shut down and it doesn't feel like a safe place for me to share. And I really need to be able to share with you.
Right.
And she had no idea that was happening. And she really took that comment in the best way. And we kind of moved on from there. So I think, there's ways that we can have conversations with people that are non-judgmental, but that kind of bring things up. We can do it without throwing our kid under the bus, but
Right.
it does require some vulnerability and that's not always easy. And I also think that there are safe people to have those conversations with, and then there are not so safe people.
Right.
So part of it is making that judgment call for yourself.
Yeah. I love that. And I guess it's people like you and I guess, who are having these experiences, and it's kind of a responsibility to cut the silence and keep the conversations going. Because I know I have family members. I know that there are close friends who have these same issues, and if they're not really ready to speak up about it, but I know that I've been strengthened when they speak to me about it. And so I think even having the platforms that we do and facilitating these discussions will hopefully create even more of that awareness and education. So I really feel like even just something that will branch out from this episode, something that I feel really passionate about as we're talking, is this is something I need to discuss more on my social media. I need to go on Instagram Live, Facebook Live, and really talk about this, because it can be, I think there's a safe way to not be throwing our kids under the bus and not be I think we get afraid that we're just complaining and venting when that's a piece of it. There needs to be some venting, because people need to know what we're experiencing. They need to actually know specifics and details without us being like vague and, oh, my kid's just really difficult. Like, some days are just hard. Well, nobody's going to understand what that means, because we all have hard days, and parenting's hard for everybody, no matter if you have a differently wired child or not. So yeah, this is a good like moment for me to push me, because there's such an importance in sharing this stuff. So I appreciate you being on here to kind of push me in that direction.
Oh my gosh, it's so nice to have this conversation with you.
Oh my God. Tell me about it. Tell me about it. I'm so happy we're doing it. Okay, so I think that's like the bulk of really what people need to hear. I think it's great that you have the program. So the book is coming out in June. Is that correct?
That is correct. It feels like I've been working on it forever, probably because I've been writing it probably forever since he was born. But yeah, it's called Differently Wired, Raising an Exceptional Child in a Conventional World, and it will be out on June 12th. So I'm super excited about that.
Oh, that's so awesome. Oh, I can't wait. You'll have to send me a copy to read before it even releases, because I totally want to promote it to my audience. So if I can get like maybe a little VIP treatment like that, I want to read it.
Absolutely. I will send you a galley. I'd love for you to check it out.
Awesome. I can't wait. I need to educate myself more. And I think just knowing you're not alone is one of the most important steps to take in realizing there's so many resources, but personally connecting with you is, I think, more valuable than having a book recommendation. So, we're going to recommend your book to everybody, because I'm sure it's fantastic. But for me, it's really great to like have connected with you and share your story, and for everybody to hear a little bit of the background and where this story stems from, because I feel like the connection is there, and it's just going to make me feel like you actually know where I'm coming from, versus just a book I stumbled upon. So I'm excited about this. I really am.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's what I hear from people so much in my community, is they finally feel like they're being seen. And that to me, there's nothing more meaningful that I could do. It's so important for us to feel like we're being seen, and that someone understands what we're going through.
Absolutely. I love it. Okay, so my most popular, wonderful, favorite question of all time is, what makes you a marvelous mom?
Oh, goodness. What makes me a marvelous mom depends on the day, I would say. But I think I'm really pushing myself to just keep showing up with homeschooling my child and going through this transition into the teen years. And then through this busy time, I really have to give myself permission to screw up, which I do a lot, and have some bad days. Certainly people don't see that side, but I have some bad days, and I'm good about not beating myself up and kind of pushing the virtual reset button and going back in the next day and modeling all of that for him, modeling my mistakes, modeling my uncomfortableness and how I'm moving through it. And I'm hopeful that is helping him see what it looks like to go through difficulties and move through them in a way that can benefit other people.
I love it. And I think that's such a good answer, and totally makes sense given your situation. And I'm sure there's millions of other things that make you a marvelous mom, but that's such a good summary and really sums up who you are and what this was about. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing and continuing, the vulnerability on your own podcast. I'm going to send people there in the show notes so they can go check that out if this is something that they need to hear more of. So thank you so much for reaching out and being a guest on here. I've really, really appreciated it. And I've loved chatting with you. You're wonderful.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you on again as the book comes out. Maybe we can really, really promote the heck out of it as soon as June rolls around. So you guys stay tuned. You may hear from Debbie again very soon. Thank you so much again. And I appreciate you. And to everybody else, have a marvelous day, and we'll see you on the next episode.